Today is December 19th, 2024. I'm meeting today with Mr. Richard Williams in Loveland, Colorado to talk about his military career. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Rich, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Hello, Brad. Really glad to be here with you.
Excellent.
And to share this, have this opportunity to share my thinking about what I've experienced in my life.
That's what it's all about, exactly. So, well, let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Okay. I was born in Wisconsin in 1947. Parents who were very much impacted by the Second World War, obviously, and who both served in the military. My father served in the Navy and was on a destroyer during the conflict, including the Battle of Okinawa, as a pharmacist mate. My mother was in the Coast Guard, and she served as well as a pharmacist mate. So from the start, I had a significant impact by the military.
Well, if I understand from reading up on you, even going further back, you're named after a great uncle or something killed in World War I, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yes. I was named after my great uncle who was killed in the Battle of the Somme.
Wow.
The first day of the Battle of the Somme, in fact. He was only 20 years old. I was the only person to have found his grave, which is located on a beautiful hill, very scenic spot in northern France, not far from Amiens. And I appreciate that because at that point I prepared a lot of photographs and commentary and so on, and put together for my family, especially my father's brother, who was still alive at that time. And he was very, very influential because he put his country before himself, as many people did at that time.
So you grew up in Wisconsin, went through the school system, graduated. Any fond memories, any thoughts of your childhood that you want to share?
No, in fact, I did not grow up in Wisconsin.
Oh, you didn't?
I was born in Wisconsin. I was born in a little hospital called St. Mary's, which today is an old people's home, so I could be recycled if I like. The point is, I really moved around my entire life. And fortunately, that was a good thing because I enjoyed experiencing other cultures, living in other countries, and doing the things that came naturally from the military way of life. After the war, my father first was an electrician and building ships. And he didn't know anything about that, but he went over to the next ship, copied their wiring, and then went back to his ship, and voila. That's what so it took a little bit of chutzpah, I think, that he got from the military to be able to do that. Then he joined the Army after having been in the Navy. He was initially in the artillery, then in intelligence, and we lived all over the world. Pakistan, India,
Really?
Japan, 2 years, England, we lived 3 years, Italy for a year, all over the place. So I really didn't grow up in one place. In fact, I didn't even finish high school. I was in Colorado at the time, and I got my mother told me, Rich, it'd really be a good idea if you got yourself a GED, General Education Development. It was really because when I went into the military, I went into the Army. At that time, I did not have to have a high school diploma. I only had to have, it was a plus that I had the GED. So my first experience in the Army as a private, I worked my way to sergeant in the infantry. I went.
Roughly what year was it? Did you enlist?
1966.
Okay, so really by then Vietnam had flared up and was.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I was very much influenced by the fact that all of my brothers were old enough. Not my brothers, my uncles rather, were in World War II, served in World War II, and most of the my mother's brothers-in-law also served during the war, in one way or the other, in the military. So it was a very natural thing for me, really, considering the fact, in fact, my father, who served, as I said, on a destroyer, didn't find out until after the war was over that he and his brother, who was on another ship at the Battle of Okinawa, that they had been served in the same battle, that they were in with the kamikazes and so on. So to me, the military seemed to offer opportunities, and I found out that those were there if you just grabbed them. And so I started out in the infantry in 1966. I started in airborne infantry. And then I went to Sergeant E5. Then I went to Officers Candidate School. My grades were, my scores were good in the tests. And so I had an opportunity to go to the Officers Candidate program in 1966 and 67. So I graduated 1 month before I was 20 years old. So I was a 19-year-old second lieutenant. And so my first assignment was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I was involved there in a basic training company where I served as a lieutenant. I had some very formative experiences at that time because I participated as a fill-in officer. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, I served with the 82nd Airborne Division and on the streets in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
When the country was imploding, exploding.
Yeah, right.
It was on fire at that time. That was a very interesting, it was a very fascinating experience, and it had an impact on me, very much an impact on my life. Then I went off to, after some assignments in the United States, I went to Vietnam as a 21-year-old in 1968 during the Tet Offensive. And I was a platoon leader. That my predecessor, just to give you an idea of how things were at that time, he was the same age as myself. He had had a bleeding ulcer and was removed from the field because he was suffering so severely from that. And I went out in a helicopter, and the same helicopter that picked him up, I was on to replace him. So I didn't know diddly squat about anything. The only thing that saved me, frankly, there I was, a 21-year-old, and always looking up. And the thing that saved me was my sergeant, first class platoon sergeant, who trained and formed the platoon at Fort Hood before bringing it to Vietnam. So as I remember, he was probably about 3 months into my time with the platoon, where I learned a lot from him. He was wounded on a tank by hitting a mine. He lost about 3 fingers and his ear, part of his face. So I was the platoon leader then de facto, because up until that point, really, the leader of that platoon had been the platoon sergeant. But I didn't miss a chance to learn something from him. And so I took over, and I was in the platoon probably about several months. During the Tet Offensive, it was a very, very tough time. We had a lot of contact with the enemy. And while I was there, I it got to the point that I was involved in a battle that lasted 3 days. During that offensive, there was a regiment plus of North Vietnamese soldiers dug in a place called the Pineapple Forest, which is just to the west of Tam Key, which was the district headquarters. Well, it was actually, yes, it was district headquarters. And they were planning to carry out an attack against that place, that city, an important place rather, between Chu Lai and Da Nang. So if you know anything about the geography of the country, you know that it's in the first core area, the northern part of South Vietnam at that time. So interestingly, I was asked by a young soldier named David Fritz, who was my same age, but he had been left behind by the platoon sergeant, who is now wounded and gone back to the U.S. And he had been left back to clean the latrines at the base camp, and so he felt humiliated by this, and he came to me and said, LT, would you please consider taking me to the field with you when the next time you have contact with the enemy? And I said, I was reluctant to make any changes to what my platoon sergeant had made, but I was willing to give a person a chance. And I said, okay, David, I'm going to keep my eyes on you, and I'm going to make you my left gunner, M60 gunner, on the vehicle, on the command vehicle that I will be on. And the next operation that we go out on, I'll take you. And if you screw up, that will be the last time you ever see the inside of an armored vehicle. It's just too dangerous to have screw-ups in that kind of situation. People's lives depend on that. And so I took him to the field on that particular operation. The platoon had made contact with the enemy, and they took the entire troop plus, and it was reinforced by an infantry company. And we fought for 3 days on that site. Every day was your life was literally in your hands. And, when you're a leader, it's a good thing. It's actually a good thing in one respect, because you don't think about yourself. You're just constantly thinking about making the right decision, because people's lives depend on that.
But
and
that's
so
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. You get a few hours of sleep a night, but I was 21. I knew for sure that I was going to live forever, and I was commanding this platoon, and every day we fought, and this guy did a great job. He wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he was doing his best, and he was doing everything I told him to do. So the third day, in that morning, I was shot in the arm, but it wasn't that serious. I was able to stay on with the platoon, and I stayed on. And that afternoon, we overran this trench system that the enemy had, and we killed a significant amount of enemy soldiers. But as they were withdrawing, they fired, among other things, rocket-propelled grenades, RPG-7s, at these vehicles. And the vehicle that I was in was not as heavily armored as a tank, but less armored. It was an armored cavalry fighting vehicle, 2 M60 machine guns, 150 caliber machine gun, and it had 2 radios, etc. And the side of the vehicle was hit. The side of the vehicle I was in was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. It blew. The explosion caused me to lose my sight for a few seconds, and I was really terrified that I was going to lose my vision. But I realized that David was hurt. The others had somehow got out of the vehicle because by that time it was already burning. And I was afraid of secondary explosions at this point. So I was able to pull him out of the rear hatch of that vehicle with my arm. I don't know how I did that.
Your injured arm? Your wounded arm?
My right arm was wounded.
Okay.
So I pulled him out with my left arm, and unfortunately he was dead already. But I didn't realize at that time how badly wounded I was. So I stayed for a while the medic, who I told to treat the others, because I was just what I thought only superficially wounded. But when he finally came back to me, by then I had a new vehicle. I was helped by someone to get into another vehicle that I took over. And I was still running the platoon. And he grabbed my fatigue shirt up to treat me. And I thought it was only in my leg that I had been wounded. And in fact, I had wounds in the abdomen and the stomach. And at that point, I became concerned because I'd seen several soldiers die of wounds to their abdomen because they would go into shock not long after having been wounded that way. So I didn't have to be convinced too much at that point to be evacuated if I could. So I was moved to an area where the dust-off helicopters were coming to be taken away. And so I was put on the helicopter, given an IV, and as the helicopter lifted off, it took a 51 caliber machine gun round through the bottom of it, and it missed me by about a foot. And fortunately, the helicopter was able to continue its. So I went to the clearing station for. To determine whether I could go to the hospital, because the people who are seriously wounded, who are dying perhaps, they could not, they wouldn't take space on the helicopters for them. So they had someone do make that decision at this clearing station, and then I moved to the hospital.
Were you in a lot of pain, or adrenaline just covering that up, or how were you feeling at that time?
At that point, I was glad to be alive, and later on, I discovered why I was glad to be alive. But actually, I got to the hospital, and I wasn't feeling an awful lot of pain. I was just feeling an awful lot of I don't know. I was feeling a lot of. How do I explain this? Not pain so much, not sharp pain, but I was feeling dulled, as though I'd been, as though I'd been taking some kind of drugs, and that I was I was in and out of passing out, rather, really. So I got to they stripped off, cut off my clothes, asked me a lot of questions, and they had. On the stretcher that I had been brought in from the helicopter to the hospital, while my clothes were being cut off, one of the nurses said, "I think he's missing a testicle," and I was very concerned then, because I didn't have any idea really how the extent of the wounds that I had, and she said, "Oh, I found it. It's here," and it was still attached. And so she tried to put it back to the extent she could in the scrotum. And then I went to be debrided with the fragments that I had in my body. So I have no feeling from my knee to my hip on the right side because of the wounds. And I have progressive neuropathies as a consequence of this. So about 60% disability just from that one experience. So the doctor said to me, "Look, we'll try to save your leg but I just can't be sure that it'll be there. He said, it missed your it just grazed your femoral artery.
Yeah.
And he said, if it cut that, you'd have been dead in 5 minutes. So I felt very fortunate. I did wake up after that in the ICU, and I looked down. I was afraid to look, really, but I looked down and I saw that my leg was still there. So I was really fortunate about this. And so I was in traction, and I had one leg that was really screwed up. So from that hospital, oh, by the way, was still in that hospital, and then the enemy would fire 122 millimeter rockets at, in general, the post at July, where I was in the hospital, and they came in while I was in the on a bedpan, and they said, okay, if you can get under your bed, it's probably not a bad idea, because I obviously couldn't do that. So, but they did unfortunately destroy almost one entire wing of that hospital. And in fact, the first woman, Lieutenant Lane, who was killed in the Vietnam War, was killed in that hospital.
Okay. Wow.
And so when she was working, she worked on people like me. When she was not working, she would volunteer, and she worked on the enemy soldiers that we were treating.
Wow.
So she was a very special person,
Right.
who was trying to take the people out of that to a better site for protection when this happened. So anyway, I went to the hospital, from that hospital to Cameron Bay, to another hospital, then to Japan, 249th Hospital. And I saw a nurse there who I was going to visit. I'd met in California, and she said, well, we still saw each other, but I wasn't really in such good shape.
Yeah.
But I was she was assigned to the hospital there in Japan at a different hospital, not the same hospital. But then, let's see, I went from there, from Japan. They had, with my wounds, the big wounds, to close those wounds, they used something like, it looked like twisted paper, that they held paper together. Those things that were used, they held paper together. They were called what? Well, anyway,
Yeah.
they closed my wounds with that, and then I was shipped off to California. When I got to California, the pilot landed the aircraft, and there was a demonstration there waiting to meet us. And the pilot said, "No sweat, I'll go to the rear end of this particular hospital and drop you off there." And so we taxied for a while to do that, and we avoided having anybody spit on us or whatever, which we would otherwise probably experienced. You don't, by the way, don't get a chance to choose the war you're involved in.
Yeah. Right.
As you know.
Right.
So, okay, then I was treated there, and they said, well, the doctor said, "Oh gosh, those sutures should have been taken out a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of skin that's grown over those." And so they sent in this corpsman, and she had never done this before. She was even younger than I was. And she pulled sinew out with the first one that she cut. And it was very, very painful. And I said, "Well, you've got to find somebody else to do this because that's not working." And so they found somebody else. And the big thing I can remember about landing there in California was we had to have steak dinner. And so I was sent to my last hospital, which was just down the road, Fort Fitzsimmons.
Okay.
And I spent I spent a couple of months in Fitzsimmons learning how to walk again and various things. and they offered me a chance to be the assistant postal officer at Fitzsimmons. They seemed to like me for some reason. And I said, gosh, I'm not sure, because I'm trying to make up my mind whether I want to stay in the Army or not. Because I had begun some college courses, but I hadn't finished my degree. It took me 10 years at nights and on the weekends to finish my bachelor's degree. So between 67 and 77, that's what I did, between tours of Vietnam and so on. So I had a chance then to I turned that down because they said the assistant postal officer, his job consists of checking to see if he's getting mail. And I thought, well, I wasn't going to be covered in glory with that job, so I thought, better go to Fort Carson. So I went to Fort Carson, where I was the executive officer of a company, of an infantry company, and then I was a company commander.
So by this point, you're fully recovered? And,
yeah.
Okay.
By that time, I was still 21. I was a company commander. And it was a very interesting time because we were preparing the soldiers for several missions at once. The Vietnam mission, the civil disturbance mission, which was very prominent at that time, the NATO mission, at the same time, conventional mission, and also training them in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare.
Oh boy.
So, after I had finished commanding, I went off to the advanced course at Fort Knox, and then I went back to Vietnam, second time. The first time I was awarded the Purple Heart, and I was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor for another engagement that I was in that I didn't even describe. And then I was awarded the Silver Star for the engagement that I explained to you a while ago.
Okay.
But that earning the Silver Star was more about the fact that I was too busy or too stupid to look to see how badly wounded I was. So I probably it gave me I got that particular medal because I stayed and waited for the other troops to be treated before I was treated, and then finally left the battlefield. But if I had known that I was hit in the abdomen area, I would have been a little less of a hero at that point. But okay, so I went back to Vietnam, second tour.
Now, was this by choice or by?
Yeah, I was in the military. I was an Army officer. The had called me from the Pentagon and said, "Look, you're gonna make it. You're doing really, really well in the Army, and all you need to get yourself a degree, and you're gonna go places." And I seem to be doing really well, and I was planning to leave the Army up until that point, and go back to university and ultimately law school and become a prosecuting attorney, which is what I really wanted to do. And but I liked being a commander. I liked the responsibility of this, and so I enjoyed that. And I was a commander a number of times, which is very rare in the Army, because usually you're lucky if you get one or two commands. I had 5 as a captain. So I went off to my second tour in Vietnam. I was a troop commander of 240 soldiers and about 25 armored vehicles. And I was a separate armored cavalry troop. And I was a place called Duc Pho, which is south of July. And I was in that job for several months. And anyway, the biggest thing that we did was we went on a road march to Da Nang and went on big landing craft with our vehicles. Some people were silly enough to say that we were going to Hawaii. But in fact, we were going to a place called Hue, And then we went to Quang Tri, and then we went to QL9, which is the road that leads to Quezon, which is a few kilometers from the Laotian border. And so the job of our squadron was holding the border, the road open between Quezon and the Laotian border. And that was quite interesting. That was really probably one of the toughest experiences that I had over there. But because the enemy ultimately surrounded the Vietnamese that went into Laos to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they surrounded the fire bases and destroyed them one after the other, and you could see the helicopters going overhead with the South Vietnamese soldiers holding, some of them holding onto the skids because they were overpacked they were coming across the border, some of them with no weapons. It was a rout. It was not just a withdrawal. And so we weren't particularly happy about this because that road was one of the enemy's special objectives, particular objectives. And there were almost 7 divisions of North Vietnamese that were converging on this area by then. And we barely got out of there with much left intact. In fact, we went on an operation just to bring back the bodies of 7 of my colleagues that were killed over there, and they were and we barely got out of there once we got those bodies. We weren't going to leave them behind, but it was extremely difficult to do this. Well, anyway, we got out of there, and so April, May, about that time, we got out of Quezon. But Quezon itself, when we were defending Quezon, it was shelled every day, twice. And so you knew a little bit what the Marines went through in 1968 because they were there themselves in 1968. It was even worse than when I was there. So the operation was called Lam Son 7719, that particular operation, which was really the beginning of the end, because the purpose of that was to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that did not happen. And so, as a consequence, the enemy was to continue to infiltrate down into South Vietnam from North Vietnam. Okay, after that year was over, I went to Fort Hood, Texas, where I was an intelligence officer, and that was kind of interesting because my father had been an intelligence officer, and I had learned a lot from him. In fact, when he, going back to before I joined the Army, when I was about 9 years old, he was a battery commander of a 155 howitzer unit at Fort Carson, and he said, "Come on, Rick." He used to call me Rick. "Come on out. I'm going to show you how to just fire today."
Wow.
So I went out. The 4 guns were placed. I was the only kid there sitting on my shooting stick. And he gave me a pair of binoculars. And he taught me how to adjust fire. He taught me how to say, drop 200, add, go, to the right 200, all this kind of stuff. Fire for effect, all these things. And I thought, yeah, that's crazy. I mean, what kid would learn to this? But believe it or not, I used that a lot because when you're a platoon leader, like I was on my first tour, you don't get a forward observer, artilleryman, to do that for you. As a company commander, as troop commander, like I was the second time, you get that. You get a forward air controller on your vehicle who's there for the fast movers, and you get the forward observer who is responsible for those kinds of things for you. You don't have to spend your time reading the map because the forward observer has to know exactly where you are all the time, because you never want to call for fire if you don't know where you are.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so anyway, so after my time in Texas, let's see, and I finished. Let's see, I went to. Oh, they called me up and said, "You're going to the Pentagon." I said, "No, I'm not going to the Pentagon. I've been to the Pentagon. I know what that is like. So why don't you give me about a week and I'll see what I can find out." So I found out another job that I really, really liked. I was a major at that point, and I didn't have a degree. So I went to the bootstrap program for 1 year to finish my degree, but I got selected for major, and I did not even have a high school diploma. You know, I got a GED, and I had some courses finished, and so anyway, I went to the British Army and worked for 2.5 years. And I loved it. I was a tactical instructor for their officers, young officers. And so I was using stuff I had learned in combat every day. And I was called in by after a short time, I was called in by the guy I worked for, who's a brigadier. His name was Arthur Douglas Nugent. I'll never forget him. He found out I could ride, and so he had me exercising some of his polo ponies. But anyway, he said, "It's been noticed that you're a bit too keen, Richard. You're a bit too keen." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The thing is, a cavalry officer is like a swan. In both of the water line, he does nothing. He looks perfectly calm. He's just gliding along the water. Below the water line, he might be paddling a little bit, but you're working all the time. You come in early, you start the fire in the Quonset hut for everybody else, and in the furnace, and you are. And I said, "Well, yeah, but give me a break. I'm learning my job. I'm really just learning to do these courses. A lot of these things I've never done before, and I don't want to read these notes, and they don't, and the students don't want me to read these notes." Yeah. So he said, "Well, what do you want to accomplish while you're here?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to get a master's degree." "No problem." I said, "Well, to do that, I've checked into this, and I would have to leave once or twice a week at about 3:00 in the afternoon to go to London to study." He said, "Do it, no problem." So 2.5 years later, I got my master's degree from London School of Economics. And I was really pleased about this. This is because I started the Army as a private in the infantry, nothing.
Yeah.
And when I was a private in the infantry and I was underneath one of these buildings in Fort Bliss, it was in the middle of summer. There was rat feces and pieces of spiders and all kinds of stuff underneath this thing. I spent 2.5 days out there. And I pulled out from under there. There's no clouds, but I just imagined there was clouds. This big hand came out. It handed me an envelope. And I opened it up and it said, "Get an education, asshole." And so that's what I did. I was gonna get an education no matter what, because I was sure I wasn't gonna inherit anything.
Yeah.
So
what's the time frame we should from that lowly private to a master's from London School of Economics? What like a 7-year period, or what how?
Okay. Well, I came in the Army in '66.
Yeah.
And I was commissioned in '67.
Yeah.
I made captain in I was still, let's see, 2 years later. So I was 22. I made captain. Then I made major, and I was going to the University of Colorado as bootstrap program, and I'd been selected before that. So that was 1977. So when I was doing my master's degree, it was 1978 to 1980, 2.5 years. But you know, I spent 45,000 miles on trains going back and forth to these classes. So I figured out it was almost 2 months nonstop if I stayed on the train that I went back and forth. And there were times that that the alarm clock didn't wake me up, and I ended up in Weymouth, and I had to get a taxi back to where I was working because I'd missed my stop at Wool Station in Bovington, near Bovington, where I was working. And so I learned a heck of a lot in that job. It was really, really formative. Learned a lot about how to develop officers, junior officers, which I used as a commander later. So anyway, I was finished up my master's degree, and then I went to the Command General Staff College, where I was undergraduate. I was really pleased about that. And then I went back to Texas, where I was at Fort Hood again. I was an XO of a tank battalion. And then I was selected as the aide-de-camp to the 3-star General Corps Commander, which is great because there was like 50 guys who were going after that job. And he gave me a little test before that. And he graded it himself. And he had been at West Point and had been an instructor in English and astronomy. And we argued a little bit about it, but he gave me a good grade, and he hired me to do that job, and I did that job for almost a year and a half. I learned a lot from him too. He was the best general I ever worked for. He's still alive, by the way. He's 95. He just wrote a book on leadership. I just have to stay alive because I can't let him beat me, you know. So anyway, the next thing that happened after that, went to then I was a commander at Fort Riley. I was a tank commander, tank company. I had about 600 soldiers, and we went to the Mojave Desert and fought. Did training in the Mojave Desert, and we went to Germany during that time, and returned forces to Europe, which was a very, very good experience. And then after that, the piece de resistance was I got selected as the 2 guys in the Army to go to Harvard as on a fellowship, senior fellowship for 2 years. And while I was there, I had people, research assistants who were undergraduates, and I had my own office and all this stuff, like I was a professor at Harvard, in some respects, and not making as much money, obviously. Then I wrote a book on understanding low intensity conflict with another guy, and nobody would actually read this thing. It was a esoteric piece of stuff that only military would read. You know, it was a research thing. It wasn't a novel. Or interesting in that respect. So let's see. So I spent, even though I was at Harvard, I spent a lot of time in Central America and South America doing research and interviewing people. And let's see. Then what did I do then? Okay, let's see. Then I went from Harvard. Oh yeah, they sent a general up to interview myself and one other guy. Well, actually, he wasn't there to interview us. He was there to inform us. I was supposed to be the Army's next guy at the National Security Council. I was supposed to replace, wait for it, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. During the Iran-Contra scandal, he was too busy, getting rid of documents and stuff like that, and to talk to me. So they froze all the jobs there, and I didn't get that job after all, because I was supposed to go a week later to talk with him to have the handover, So I was really disappointed. I thought the one big chance I had to make general in the Army.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
Okay.
So I was really downhearted by this experience. But they called me up for the Pentagon and said, "Look, we've got this terrific job for you on the Joint Staff at the Pentagon." I said, "Yeah, right. You know what you can do with that." The same thing I told you 10 years ago before. So I called this general I knew, who's a 3-star in Stuttgart. He was chief of staff of the U.S. European Command, and he said, "Okay, Rich, I can get you a job as the colonel's job," and I was a lieutenant colonel at that time, as the secretary of the Joint Staff. And I had a new child, and I wasn't really thrilled about that because I knew I was really going to be working hard. But I went to that place, and then I did that job, and I was selected as the speechwriter for the 4-star general. And they put the protocol under me and a bunch of other people, and I did that job for about a year and a half. Then I went to Turkey, and I was Turkey Army for about 2 years. I was going to stay in Turkey because I loved it there. I was in Izmir. I was assistant chief of staff for operations as a colonel. I had about 50 officers working for me, Italians, British, Americans, Turks, who I had under my responsibility. And we had, at that time, the Gulf War. And so I was responsible for making the plans for the defense of southeastern Turkey, and for the reinforcement, if necessary, and for the evacuation of the U.S. Air Base there, which could have been attacked by Saddam Hussein had he had the opportunity, because they were undertaking a lot of missions there against him at Incirlik at the air base. So after that time, that was a very dangerous time also, because there was a lot of Kurds that were who were fighting against the Turkish army, and they were not happy with us because we were helping the Turks. And so I had to take a different way to work every day, with wearing a uniform and so on, because one of my friends who poo-pooed this, wore his uniform, took the same route every day and everything. 2 guys were waiting for him when he got to his apartment. And when just as he was opening the door of his apartment, he heard something. He turned his head. That saved his life because the round went through his face, came out this end,
Wow.
like that. And they found those guys with their fingerprints on the Coke cans that they left behind, and they got those characters later on. So anyway, I finished up in Turkey, and I was really enjoying. I was studying Turkish. I was loving Turkey, and they called me up from the Pentagon. They said, listen, you've been selected for this job as special attaché at the American Embassy in Paris. I said, what? I've never studied French. This is somebody screwed up. It's like they screwed up when they thought I had a great math background. They chose me to work with nuclear weapons at an earlier time in my career. And I went through that. That was another interesting experience that I don't have time to discuss. But anyway, so I said, and this guy said, well, you'd be the most ungrateful colonel in the Army if you did turn this job down. You know, this is in Paris, Paris Embassy. Can you read and write? I mean, you understanding what I'm saying? And so I stopped studying Turkish, started French, because I'd only studied German up until that point. And so I went to France, and I really loved the country. Sometimes I felt that people didn't deserve it that were there, but it was a beautiful country, and I loved visiting the castles and all that stuff, and I liked the job, and so I was responsible for the Paris Air Show and the U.S. participation in that, and getting B-2 bombers to fly and all this interesting stuff, and we spent a year preparing for that, doing conference calls. Anyway, so I had that job, and I liked it, and I studied my French, and I decided, well, then I'm about ready to leave the Army, but I have one more chance. They called me and said, do you want to be a professor at the College of Strategic Studies and Defense Economics at Garmisch, Germany? And I said, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So I went there, and I did that for about a year and a half. I loved that job. And I left there for my first job as a retiree from the Army in 1997. I finished and took a job at Brussels in the Partnership for Peace, which I thought was very appropriate, especially because I'll just tell you the highlight of that job. I did that for about almost 16 years, but I was promoted twice. It was really fun before I got promoted. After that, I wasn't really enjoying it as much because I was responsible for chairing a lot of meetings and getting consensus. But before that, I was doing a lot of work in the field, especially in the Balkans and Eastern Europe.
Now, Partnership for Peace, is this part of NATO?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the idea was to help prepare these nations for membership, effectively.
Okay.
And so in Albania, when I went to Albania in 1997, which is when I joined NATO, they decided that nobody wanted to go to Albania because there was shooting going on. They said, well, you were colonel in the Army, so you probably know what that's all about. So have fun. Enjoy it. Because the Secretary General promised to send some help for Albania. I got there. It was really, really interesting. I'll tell you, I don't have enough time to tell you all the stories, but basically in Albania, I discovered that the Deputy Minister of Defense, I got to his office by flashlight because there were no lights. And I got there, and he said, I think it's great the Secretary General sent you here to help. This is wonderful. He said, what you need to do is get a whole bunch of NATO people and bring them down here and clear all our minefields, because when we've had problem since this anarchy has been going on, and this internal fighting has been taking place, a revolution, in fact, has been taking place, and a lot of people have been killed. And because we have stopped all these sites where they had weapons and ammunition we have used mines to protect them from being, because the brass can be sold, and people are starving to death. And you come down here and fix this for us. I said, look, I've been in this job for 1 week. I can't go back to Brussels and tell them, look, we're going to be the Polish minefield clearers down in Albania, and isn't that going to be fun? You know, I can't sell that to anybody. You know, I said, maybe, if you tell me what you need and write it down, I can go back, I convince these 16 countries at that time to start a trust fund of a certain amount of money that I can use to hire people, experts, who can come back down here and train your people how to do this.
Oh, okay.
You see, that I can sell that, you know, but I can't sell anything else. So we did this for about 4 years to clear up 6 million anti-personnel mines, and we got a lot of we turned the dynamite into ammonite and used that for a lot of factories were created because of the work that we did, and so they use that in construction projects. Then we use the metal in the seat to make park benches and manhole covers. And the plastic that was used in these mines we used to make toys. And children were used to use these toys.
Wow.
It was wonderful. It was the most exciting thing that I did in my life.
Wow. Wow.
Because I really felt that somehow I had done something
Made it
that
different.
was useful, that really helped people. It caused a lot less people to be killed. It caused a lot less animals to be killed, and we trained these people, and they could do it themselves after 4 years. You know, training, special training stuff. Oh, then a colonel came to me at one of our meetings down there, and he said, guess what? We haven't told you this, but we have some chemical munitions that we didn't tell you we have. The Chinese and the Russians have provided to us. And I said, well, where is it? And they said, well, it's scattered around the country. It's all these sites. I said, okay, we're going to first thing consolidate it at 1 or 2 sites. Then I'll work the problem. And so I went back to Brussels, and I found this friend of mine who lived across the street from me. He was the deputy chief of mission of the Swiss mission to NATO. And I discovered that they had the only plasma arc furnace in the world, a mobile one. This is a device that takes chemicals like mustard gas and chlorophyll gas and even nerve agent, and puts through this system that heats it up, and it finally comes out the other end encased inside the gaseous substance that can be buried, and it's totally inert. So I talked him into getting this, moving it down, and it came on a ship down the ship came down the Adriatic Sea. Then it went to Durrës, which is the port city of in Albania, and then across country to the capital of Tirana. And then they spent 6 weeks, 24/7, scientists, a bunch of people in lab coats and everything, doing this work, and they destroyed every ounce of chemical munitions in the country. And I got them to sign the Ottawa Agreement that they would never ever use mines again, anti-personnel mines, and chemicals ever again, chemical weapons. So And I got that, on my own initiative, I did some of that, because I could, because I could speak in Albania for the Secretary General, And then we went on a road show all around the Balkans doing this, in Croatia, Kosovo, all sorts of places.
Had the troubles there broken out by then? Or would that
Yeah, at the end of that, we then went in to help clean up the mines, the unexploded munitions, and train the people, use the same drill again, got the money through the countries, trust fund, got a team of experts together. They did the training. They used their people to do the work. So we didn't have anybody of ours killed or wounded down there, thankfully.
This was after Yugoslavia broke up into
Yeah.
various civil wars and wars. Okay.
Yeah. So that Yugoslavia became Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, and all those countries. Not Albania, but it became Yugoslavia became several countries. So after that,
So what was your status there? Were you on loan from our government, or were you just a private contractor that got hired by NATO, or what?
no, I was on the Secretary General's staff.
But so you fully retired from the Army.
Yes.
But you weren't like the United States representative to NATO.
No.
You were just a.
No, I had to interview for that job.
Okay. All right.
I had to speak French.
Okay.
I had to read and write French. I had to read and write English. I had to take the test, and I had to win. I had to be hired
Okay.
as a
Okay.
civilian.
Okay.
I was a civilian.
Wow.
So I started out as a PFP coordinator. Then I was the head of PFP, which I had about 10 people. Then I was the deputy director of the Armaments Directorate in the division, Defense Investment Division. So then after that, I retired from there in 2012.
So you were with NATO, what, 16 years?
Yeah, it's about approximately 16 years. So I went the next day. Well, actually, I was given a chance to work for many American companies, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, several other companies, making a lot more money as a vice president, etc. But I thought partnership for peace, that's something I could do. It's not ethically, morally
Yeah.
tempting, which sometimes if you sell weapons to the wrong kind of people, that's ethically
Right.
borderline as far
Yeah,
as
yeah.
I'm concerned.
Right.
And my stomach is full of war. So Partnership for Peace was very appealing to me.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. I don't want and since then, now I write articles with a friend who's a West Point guy, still lives in, and I do a lot of posts on LinkedIn, which you probably saw. And, mainly I deal with issues related to the war with Ukraine right now. I write about that. And so I take the expertise that I've had from 31 years in the military and 16 years at NATO. I put it all together and I mix it up, and it gives me some insight into these things.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I am here because I see my children and grandchildren every year. I have a house and a car here. And then I have a house and a car in near the French border. And my wife is not living in that house now. She's gone home because she's lonely. She's gone home to live with her mother. because she's so lonely because I've been here since May. And the reason I'm here is because my sister is gravely ill with colon cancer. And her situation is very difficult. So,
Well, back up while we're speaking about family. Back up, and you'd mentioned you were traveling around and you had a new son. I think you'd mentioned one. Talk about how you met your wife and a little bit about your family that you want to share. Yeah.
Okay. I was married on my second tour in Vietnam. I had 2 children with my first wife, and then I got married again. And I'm married right now to a Belgian woman who speaks only pretty much French. So that's why I have to work on my French so I can win some of the arguments. But I love the language. I actually like it a lot more than German. So I have a daughter who lives in Toronto. She also went to LSE. I sent her to University of Edinburgh. She worked for L'Oreal in New York, and she she has a child, 3 years old, but she works with another person and started a new business together as a consultant for doctors on facial issues. And then I have a daughter who works for Wells Fargo, and a son-in-law who works as a battalion chief for the Puger Fire Department, and a son who owns his own business in Denver and helps physicians with spinal surgery as an expert. So he's about 52 now. I have a daughter's about 36 and one 47, something like that. And so when I find out I'm just about 78 now. So when I have a chance to do something, I do it now. And so when I found out about you and this opportunity to talk about myself a little bit, I was a very introverted person, but the military being command helped a little bit.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I became a little bit more self-confident after. So I commanded an infantry company when I was 21, so first lieutenant. I commanded a mechanized infantry company. I commanded in combat a troop armored cavalry, which is the same thing as a company. Then I commanded a tank company, and I commanded a headquarters company, and I commanded a basic training company.
How do you to me it's fascinating. Just in itself, if you had been gone to West Point or had a college degree, but how do you think you managed to do that, starting at this lowly private with a GED? I mean, that in itself just adds to the story. What?
Yeah, well, it helps to have a mother like I did. Because she kept saying to me, like, "Why aren't you a general yet?" So she was always putting the marks on the wall a little higher, for me. And I realized, I told you about that experience with the envelope and get the education. Mm-hmm. That's an imaginary event, obviously. Yeah. But in some respects, it's true.
Was that image your mom handing you that envelope? I mean, is it
probably?
Yeah. Okay.
She had high expectations for me. And I think it's because I calmed her down on the flight to England, the first flight when I was about 4 years old, almost 5, and it was a military flight, and one of the engines started on fire.
Oh man.
And we were going down to ditch the airplane in the sea. They had already issued the flashlights with the shark repellent and the flashlight and all this stuff. And I said, and my mother was crying and all this kind of stuff. And finally, before they got to the water, you could actually see the whitecaps. They got the fire out finally. And we ended up going to an alternate airport, which was closer to the coast, where my dad picked us up. So and my mother for years after that wouldn't go on an airplane ever. So, but I managed to calm her down a little bit. And after that, I think she believed in me, that I was going to take care of things one way or the other somehow. And that I was going to start out as a private in the infantry, but I was going to make it in the Army, And I feel good about my life.
Good. Yeah. Good.
I'm a little bit more emotional now because I take a medication for my stage 4 cancer that it reduces the testosterone, which is the principal male hormone. And but if I didn't take this medication, I would be dead. So I take that medication to keep the prostate-specific antigen down, and so I do get emotional, whereas I wouldn't normally as a military officer before this happened. But I had cancer now for 9 years. They told me at the beginning, this guy said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you've got 7 out of 12 of your biopsies were cancerous, and we can't do the operation. It just wouldn't help. And you've got about he threw in gratuitously. You've got about a 30% chance of living for 5 years."
Oh boy.
So I'm going to go back. I want to go back there. He's still in Belgium. Look at me in the eyes. I'm still alive. 9 years.
With all that you've done and experienced through your career, could it be attributed to service-related?
Yeah, actually, because I spent so much time in Quezon, and because dioxin, which is effectively Agent Orange, I was subjected to much more of that than necessary. And the cancer that I have is one of the cancers that a lot of people die from. Frankly, to tell you the truth, Brad, my name, I think, should be up on that wall because I'm dying. Our president at that time was Lyndon Johnson. He knew, like McNamara knew, that what he was doing to us, he knew. And he used that stuff anyway. But I would have 100% combat disabled without that cancer because of the wounds that I've had. I have 100% for the cancer by itself, combat related, because that type of cancer that I have it's not necessarily the cause of the cancer that I have, but probably is. So I feel like one of the fights I would like to fight is before I leave this world, I would like to say, look, people like me should be on that wall because we're dying.
It's going to kill far more than died in country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if I die of cancer, that's the reason.
Yeah.
That I'm dying from dioxin, Agent Orange, and it's just like I was killed by a sniper.
Yeah. Yeah.
in 1968.
Right.
Same thing.
Right.
But I'm dying a little bit later.
Right.
That's all.
Well, what are your thoughts, now that you've had 50 plus years to chew on it, what are your thoughts on the Vietnam War, and if you'd like to share anything?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. First time I went there, okay, I was 21. I weighed about 160 pounds. Wasn't too smart, obviously. So anyway, I was platoon leader. I was in the combat all the time. I didn't do anything with the country, with the civilians at all.
Yeah.
That platoon, those 40 soldiers, were my life. That's it. So I believed the party line at that point, which was we were there to stop the domino effect. Seemed logical. Our job was to stop communism, the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, etc. Our job was to help an incipient democracy, which I kind of accepted. Sounded like it sounded reasonable. So when I went first over there, I thought, okay, I go over there, I fight them over there, so I don't fight them in Los Angeles or whatever, Second time I go over there, a little different, 2 years older, captain, a lot more experienced, well, somewhat more experienced, and 23 years old, something like that, and company commander for 6 months or so. Pretty much the same thing as the first time. Tunnel vision, 240 soldiers, 25 armored vehicles. Every wake up, I live to make the decisions that save their lives. I looked so young then, sometimes the kids, I'd walk past and someone would say, there goes the boy wonder. And I'd say, yeah, you better hope so. Because your life could depend on it. So anyway, if you weren't particularly good, you got a bullet in the back of your head anyway. So, but fortunately, I didn't get one of those.
Yeah, right.
But the second half of my tour, I was a intelligence officer. And so I got the first couple of weeks, 3 weeks, month, I was getting all these reports from the division, brigade, all this, telling me what the enemy was going to do and stuff like that. And I'd say, yeah, and I could tell my commander all that stuff that I would read. Or I could get off my butt and go out there and get it myself. And that's what I did, effectively. So I got myself an interpreter, a bodyguard, and a driver, and myself, and I went everywhere.
Wow.
By myself. Some places I shouldn't have gone. They were a little bit, fuzzy. Shouldn't have gone. But I talked to district chiefs, village chiefs, all kinds of chiefs. I talked to people. I found out farmers. I found out the average person, Vietnamese, wasn't educated, particularly. He cared about 2 or 3 things in his life: his crops, his ancestors who were buried under his care, and his friends. That's it. Politics, no interest in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Democracy, communism, he wasn't interested in those things. So, and then I started to discover that this government was a lot more corrupt than I thought. And I said, what are we fighting for over here? Why are we, what are we, I put my life on the line for these guys. And there is, this war sucks. And so, totally two sides of a coin of really
Yeah.
my feelings about that. And more recently, Iraq, 9/11, what we did in 9/11, those bases in Afghanistan, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Stay in Afghanistan, trying to make Afghanistan into New Jersey or whatever. See, I have
Yeah.
processing what's going on there a little bit, and so I have a different point of view.
Well, it's a valuable point of view based on your experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm concerned about America now, really, really concerned. I think that we don't have people aren't educated to know to select the right leaders, and there needs to be a lot more civics, a lot more history, a lot more things. I hope that after I'm gone, those things that America discovers that physics and what goes on with computers and stuff like that is important, but it is, we ought to move these other things up there too, you know. Otherwise, this person is not educated, you know. I spent a lot of years being educated, you know, not 4 years, 10 years.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and then taking a course or two at a time to get the best degree. 2.5 years, not 1 year. Then 2.5 years at Harvard, you know, and I didn't have to spend a lot of time in the library screwing around because I had two research assistants who would take care of that for me. But you know, I spent time in that library for me, you know, because I didn't think it was appropriate to have these people do it, you know, on a project of my self-improvement or whatever. They weren't. They were supposed to be working on stuff which was quite different. You know, I mean, for this research study that I was doing, this book, they were supposed to be working on that. So, but yeah.
Well, as we start to wind down this interview, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything? I didn't ask a whole lot of questions. I quite frankly, it was just fascinating to listen. I know we only got the tip of the iceberg of your story, but is there anything else that you wanted to talk about so that we hopefully get a fairly well-rounded version of your story, or do you think, are you satisfied? Do you think we?
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied. I think within the parameters that you've given, which is general your life, and in particular military, in my case, military and NATO, I suppose. I think I focused on those things and not spent a lot of time gallivanting around the rose bushes or whatever with other things that aren't relevant, you know, to you or to anybody who might watch this.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. I
So.
guess, usually the last question I like to ask these questions is, as you look back on your military experience and with NATO and such, how did it change your life, play a role in your life, affect your life? I mean, generally, for most people, you know, it's a long period of time. Yours is over a large period of time, and but how did it change your life? Do you think? What do you think? I don't even know how to really rephrase this question. For most people,
Okay, but I think you know what you're getting at. I think, well, no, I know how it affects
normally
me.
I'll talk to somebody
Okay.
that has, you
Yeah.
know, went to Vietnam, and then it's like, well, how did that experience play a role in the rest of your life? But your experience stretches over a great period of time. So I'm trying to figure out how to rephrase that question. And
Yeah. Well, it affected me from alpha to omega. Okay. Every facet of my life was impacted by the military,
right,
and
yeah,
by NATO,
yeah,
and by my experiences with this in wartime, peacetime, and terrorism, counterterrorism, all the rest. So, what it probably let me walk out with,
okay,
out of all this, more than anything else, is what it means to be an American. What it means to about sacrifice. What it means about leading people because you have character and integrity. Those are the factors that I gained from this. And then applying those to every other aspect of my life. And it's taught me to be pretty hard on myself and to hold myself to a higher standard. See, not perfect, far from it, but it has taught me that you know, the profession of arms is it teaches you to be a special person who's willing, who has a lot to give to others about how to be a good American.
wow, wow,
That's what it tells me.
yeah, yeah.
You know, probably maybe I should have got something else out of it. I don't know, but that really over the 31 military, 16 NATO. That's what, 47 years.
Wow.
And you know, you live your life in many, many different countries. More than half my life has been in other countries. 2 years Japan, 2 years India, Pakistan, 2 years Turkey, 28 years Belgium, 4 years France, 7.5 years Germany, 5 years and a half England. And that doesn't count the other miscellaneous traveling that I did. Yeah,
In Vietnam.
you know, in Vietnam, and almost a month in Argentina, and lots of things, you know. So I think from that, you get the chance to look at yourself more objectively as an American too. You don't look at yourself in an introverted sort of way.
Yeah.
You look at yourself through the eyes of a lot of different kinds of people, speaking lots of different kinds of languages, thinking lots of different things, with a totally different education point of view. You see? And I've seen lots of the bad things about America with a lot more clarity than I used to. Why is it there are 400 and some thousand people who go bankrupt because of medical expenses? And all these other countries have zero go bankrupt. That to me talks to me about the compassion that I think Americans should have. I don't think we should have a socialistic state, but I think we should sure as hell have something between what we have and that. See, I'm fortunate because I'm a veteran. If something happens to me, they're gonna take care of me somehow. 100% disabled and stuff. And I have insurance that I got with NATO. But if I didn't, the Army sure is going to help me as much as they said they would.
Yeah.
When I was a private,
Yeah.
they said, all of your next life, all of your life is taken care of medically. No.
Yeah.
Wrong. See? And so when somebody shoots a hole in the sky, who turns down a lot of people who are dying because he's CEO of a health insurance, I have a part of compassion for him. Yeah, or maybe the people who are getting turned down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that happening? See? So they can make their stockholders happy.
Yeah.
So we're a long ways from being perfect
Yeah.
here. And a lot of Americans think, oh yeah, we're perfect. We've got Christianity, we've got voting, we've got freedom, human rights, we've got this and that, we've got, everything is perfect here. No, we don't. We've got a long way to strive. We've only done 248 years, and we got a long way to go. But, yeah.
Well, we'll close down this interview. I want to thank you for sitting down to tell an absolutely fascinating story, but as well, I want to thank you for your service to our country and, quite frankly, to the world. So, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's been my honor. Thank you.